right, welcome back to World Crisis Radio. That's Phil Berg, ObamaCrimes.com. And remember, those of you who are coming at this from the left liberal side or the peace movement side, if you have a president who cannot produce a birth certificate, he is blackmailable. He's not your president. He's the president of whoever can blackmail him with the knowledge that he has no birth certificate. So that is intolerable. And maybe that explains why the constituencies that Obama pandered to are now so disappointed, because he didn't pander to them. He didn't do anything. And in particular on the war escalation in Afghanistan, on the sellout to the private insurance companies and big pharma in the health bill, and then also the other things that he's done. There's an article here in the Washington Post how he's offended a list of about a dozen groups, all key constituencies, unions, women, LGTB, and so on down the line. Nobody satisfied with Obama. Well, yes, he's a Wall Street puppet, and one of the mechanisms of being a Wall Street puppet is that you're blackmailable. So that's, I think, a way to look at this, and it's got to be clarified, because otherwise you've got a constitutional crisis, which is what you have right now. Now let's go through foreign affairs in a couple of segments. First of all, the coup in Kyrgyz. What is this? It is clear that Russia is winning in Kyrgyz. Putin has been on the phone with the new prime minister, Otunbayeva. Otunbayeva, going back to the Soviet era as a diplomat, a veteran politician. Her connections all go to the Russian and Soviet sides. And Putin has said now that this guy Bakiev, the president who has been ousted, Putin says that Bakiev stepped on the same kind of rake as his unfortunate predecessor, Akayev, who was driven out in the color revolution, the tulip revolution of 2005, right after the Ukrainian orange people power coup, color revolution. This guy, Akayev, had said, well, we're not going to have that here, and then NATO intelligence and the CIA and so forth turned around and hit him with a people power coup that brought in Bakiev. There are regional tensions. Bakiev is from the underdeveloped south. The more cultured and more advanced northern part of Kyrgyz is much more Moscow-oriented. Russia says that they did not instigate the coup. Well, we don't know, but we can see that they seem to be winning. At the beginning, the new government said that they were going to oust the U.S. from Manas Air Force Base, which is the key logistics hub for the war in Afghanistan. Now they've said, no, they'll just be the status quo, but that lease now comes up in July. That has to be renegotiated. That would be a chance for this new government to oust the U.S. from that base. There's tremendous resentment against the Pentagon, because the Pentagon entered into crony deals with the Bakiev clan, where they were getting $50, $60, $70 million a year in rake-offs from maybe that was the rake that Putin is talking about. They stepped on the same rake-off on this Air Force base. So it means that the U.S. position in Central Asia is collapsing. This is an example. It may indeed be that some of these rebellions were spontaneous, but God knows they don't stay spontaneous very long, and I'm always skeptical about spontaneity. It can't be excluded. The Russians are there at the Kant Air Force Base. So it looks like, again, the Russians gaining ground as the U.S. puppet Bakiev falls, and this base is now up in the air, whether that's going to be there. Then we get the satraps revolt in Afghanistan. Karzai playing the China card, Karzai playing the Iranian card. We've got Fuad Ajami here in the Wall Street Journal talking about the decline of U.S. power in Central Asia. Yes, indeed, but he doesn't really go into the China side of things very much. The U.S. wants to say that it's Iran doing it because they want to attack Iran. China, they're a little bit more hesitant in branding them. What we have this week is that after saying that the U.S. was involved in vote fraud, specifically that Ambassador Peter Galbraith, this holier-than-thou imperialist thug and torpedo, this is what Karzai had been saying, that Galbraith did vote fraud, that Karzai has now said that he would like to join the Taliban, that the U.S. wants to make him into a puppet, that the U.S. is an occupying force along with NATO, and he would like to join the Taliban to form a national resistance against the foreign invaders. Well, interesting. Remember that Eikenberry, as well as Galbraith, right, the U.S. ambassador, former General Eikenberry, along with Peter Galbraith, had been strongly anti-Karzai. Galbraith now says that Karzai is a drug addict and that he's been using too much of the heroin production of Afghanistan. Ooh, that is hurting. And look, people are being asked to fight and die for this regime. It's time to get out. It's time to liquidate this entire insane thing, because with the decline of the U.S. imperial position, it becomes harder and harder to maintain these extremely advanced outposts of empire. Ukraine has now announced that there will be no joining of NATO. Even the commission to study it has now been abolished by the new president, Yanukovych. The whole crew of Orange Revolution, NATO agents and IMF agents has been ousted. So China gaining in Afghanistan, Russia gaining in Kyrgyz, even though Kyrgyz has a long border with Russia. Now, in terms of the basic strategy, as we go into this nuclear stuff, remember, Obama is supposed to be Neville Chamberlain, but Neville Chamberlain properly understood. In other words, he is somebody who is a posture of studied appeasement, a studied weakling, with the idea then that you're going to get other people to fight while you hang back on the edges and laugh and benefit and pick up the pieces. And that is the so-called tertius gaudens, and the strategy, I guess, in U.S. geopolitical parlance is buck passing. The idea is play Russia and China against Iran, if at all possible. Play Iran against Russia and China. This hasn't been working very well. The color revolution in Iran is now obviously a failure. But still, the idea is nice to Russia, try to be nice to China if you can, and try to lock them into a course of confrontation with Iran. Now, be nice to Russia would be the U.S.-Russia START II treaty. Everybody comes down to 1550 warheads. Medvedev and Obama signed it this week. We'll look at this in more detail, but it's essentially a gesture of this type. It's a very shaky deal. Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia has already said if the U.S. starts building anti-ballistic missile defenses outside of this treaty, which only covers the offensive side of weapons, then the treaty may have to be liquidated. There's also some question about getting it through the Senate, right? Will the Republicans try to block it in the Senate? Certainly for this year, we can forget about it. This will become an issue at a later point. And we'll talk about Obama's nuclear strategy here in a minute when we come back on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So we've got the U.S. START II treaty signed by Obama and Medvedev, and the inevitable optimism, I guess, around this. I'm thinking of the spirit of Locarno, 1925, right, that was going to bring essentially peace in our time. Didn't work. Especially arms control treaties are a very, very unstable basis for anything. Obama has now announced his new nuclear strategy. The U.S. will not use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear states who attack with chemical and biological weapons unless those non-nuclear states are branded by the U.S. as not observing the Non-Proliferation Treaty or otherwise are exempted. So basically a meaningless statement. Again, this is all window dressing. This is to try to get some cover for a policy of attempting to strangle the economic development of Iran and prepare the breakup of Iran under the cover of nuclear non-proliferation and the fight against nuclear terrorism. I would, in addition to all the obvious points that have been made about this by all kinds of people, the idea that the U.S. is talking about the non-proliferation regime, the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, is an obscene joke, because the U.S.-India nuclear deal is already a complete violation that throws this entire non-proliferation regime out the window. So the biggest violator is now going to be judging who is in conformity with the NPT and who is not. And they say Iran is not in conformity with the NPT. Well, that's not what the International Atomic Energy Agency says, even under the ambiguous character Amano, certainly not under El Baradei. Do we have any statement in that direction? So then we're going to have this Photo Opportunity Summit, which again, 47 countries. Medvedev, I guess, is going to be here. President Hu of China will come. Netanyahu will not come because he thinks that the Muslim countries will gang up on him as a nuclear weapons state. The idea, again, same thing. Get some credibility so that you can beat Iran over the head on nuclear issues. And, of course, for Hu, it costs him nothing to come. I'm just wondering, if you look at what Chinese Prime Minister Wen did at Copenhagen with this masterful blocking of the Anglo-American attempt at installing a worldwide carbon dictatorship to strangle the development of India, China, and the rest of the third world, look at what Wen did in Copenhagen. Is that what Hu might do in Washington, D.C.? In other words, prevent the formation of a lockstep under U.S.-British domination with French help from Sarkozy against Iran. That'll be interesting to see, because he's not just going to be a potted plant. He's going to be an active participant. We've also got the U.S. now getting China to discuss sanctions against Iran. The Chinese had not been willing to discuss it, and they're still not even willing, as far as I can see. Foreign Ministry in Beijing is not willing to confirm that China is discussing sanctions against Iran. This had started when Sarkozy came to town, this wounded demagogue. After losing his regional elections, he started posturing with Obama about how bad Iran was, trying to give himself some profile in that regard. And now China is talking. Well, they may talk for a long time. They may have joined these talks to sabotage them, to delay them, to dilute, to delay, and all the other obvious things. So they'll take the long view there, too. A lot of hysteria in the Anglo-American press this past week about China supports Iran sanctions. Has not happened. China agrees to float renminbi. Also has not happened. We've also got, when Geithner was in India, he celebrated that U.S.-Indian alliance, and that, again, clear violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty regime. We're having, in Iraq, the U.S., with power of the U.S. collapsing everywhere across the world, the U.S. puppet Alawi is not able, so far, to form a government against Maliki, who comes on the scene as a Iranian-backed and indeed Chinese-backed candidate. And we've now got Muqtada Sadr of the Mahdi army, the Shiites of the lower Euphrates, coming on in support of Jafari, the other guy who has been prime minister so far. We've got all three of them. All three of the prime ministers post-Saddam are now contending for the prime minister's office. And I think it's a sign that, again, U.S. position not very strong. More reality, as usual, comes from the man with a mind like a ragbag who periodically blurts out things that he's heard in his briefings, which he's not supposed to say in public. Biden now says nuclear war has never been more likely than today because of nuclear terrorism. And that is what Obama is actually going to be up to on the 12th and 13th next week with the Nuclear Weapons Security Summit here in Washington, D.C. So, concerning the Middle East, I've said this a number of times here, but you can now see it in the Washington Post. Column by David Ignatius this past Wednesday, April 7th, Obama's Middle East plan, and it's what I've said. It is to assemble an Arab-Sunni front against Iran. And the critical thing is that the solution of the Israeli-Palestinian contention, the two-state solution so-called, is intimately linked to the attempt to contain, reduce, break up Iran. These are basically the same policy. It's not to say to Israel, you've just got to make a deal with the Palestinians. It's to say, you can make a deal with the Palestinians because you should really be worrying about Iran. So make a deal with the Palestinians, even with the PLO and with Hamas, because then we're going to proceed to use that as a springboard to get the Arabs and the Sunnis lined up against Iran, even as we go for sanctions, and that will take away your biggest problem perceived by people like Netanyahu. So the Obama policy is a war policy, and we're told by Ignatius that Netanyahu, under the cover of all of this brouhaha, right, the big diplomatic clashes and the dinner invitation that he didn't get, that Netanyahu is seriously considering an American peace plan to resolve the Palestinian conflict because it's linked to some idea of taking out Iran, but using these Arab and Sunni proxies as the way to do that. In other words, don't you Israelis fight Iran. Let's use the Arabs and the Sunnis in the first line, and let's use them up. Let's get them chopped to pieces against the Iranians. So that is a policy likely to lead to war. And if you look across the world, Thailand is also in a state of emergency. We'll look at the internal Thai situation. It's always got to do in Thailand between pro-Chinese forces and U.S. forces that are mainly anti-Chinese, anti-trade, and so forth in their general orientation. So now we're going to switch gears now. We've got to take a couple of steps backward, and we've gone through this big austerity push coming from Volcker, from Bernanke, from Orsag, ultimately from Obama, right, because he's going to become the austerity man next year. If you have a situation where Obama starts turning around and saying, I'm now going to cut the main form of social insurance, Social Security, here in the United States, you are back once again to 80 years ago, the Hermann Müller government of the SPD, Social Democrats in Germany, who fell 80 years ago on an issue of cutting social insurance in the form of unemployment benefits. And we'd just like to get back to the Weimar comparison in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now here in our last segment, let's go through some comparisons. We now have Bernanke, Volcker, Orsag, the various ghouls and enforcers of drastic, draconian, lethal austerity against the American people. Balance the budget. Balance the budget. Herbert Hoover, 1931. Herbert Hoover, 1932. Balance the budget. Having what amounts to an attempted deflationary policy. Of course, today we've got the worst of both. We've got hyperinflation or inflation at some levels in terms of things like medical insurance and college tuition and other expenses, and then we've got deflation when it comes to factory closings, and 7% of the U.S. workforce now productive in the sense that they're working in factories and manufacturing goods. It doesn't work. And we can say it doesn't work because this whole thing has been tried. Exactly what Volcker and Bernanke and Orsag are demanding is the policy of Heinrich Brüning in the Weimar Republic from March of 1930, 80 years ago now, and about July of 1932. And if you go back, I want you to go back and become somehow familiar with at least some of the main features of this time, because it's on the basis of this that you can essentially say where are certain things going or make a much better guess than you could otherwise. In the course of the broadcast, I've talked about Hjalmar Schacht. Well, he was the governor of the Central Bank of Germany, the Reichsbank, in the late 1920s up until about 1929, 1930. This is Bernanke. This is somebody who, puts out word, about policies that he wants, doesn't want. He interferes in the government. Volcker has some aspects of being a Schacht. Both central bankers, as Schacht was. Schacht, of course, then went on to become the finance minister for Hitler. That's where you see where some of these people tend to end up. You go back to Weimar Germany, you find this character, Hugenberg, Hugenberg. He's a right-wing media mogul who also influences a political party, the German National People's Party, the most reactionary of the respectable sort of bourgeois parties, not the hooligan, rowdy National Socialists, but the more respectable reactionary types. This is Rupert Murdoch. This is somebody who puts out a reactionary line through Fox News. All these people, Glenn Beck and so forth, O'Reilly, they're all puppets of the new Hugenberg, Rupert Murdoch. And then we've got, as I pointed out, the possibility of General Petraeus running for president along with Mitt Romney as a vice presidential candidate. I still think this is the most likely Republican ticket for 2012. We've got the Republican Southern Leadership Conference, and I would urge you to look at these people. Look at Palin. She's interested in making money. She's not a political candidate. And then we're told that Haley Barbour and Jim DeMint are serious presidential candidates. This is a clown show. This is simply a ridiculous exercise. We have this guy, Gaffney, the neocon think tanker here in Washington, D.C. He comes on the radio every night between 9 and 10 or so, and he's been talking about Petraeus as a possible presidential candidate. And you can see that the neocons are already trying to align, at least some of them, trying to align themselves with Petraeus so they'll be present at the creation. Well, who would Petraeus be in the Weimar Republic? Of course, it would be Field Marshal von Hindenburg, the general, the military commander of Germany in the First World War, which he lost, and the Hindenburg Line and everything connected with this, who then became president of Germany in 1925 and stayed there until he died as president, and he was the one who ultimately invited Hitler in, made Hitler the chancellor in January of 1933. Petraeus, and again, the advantage of somebody like Petraeus von Hindenburg is they can say, I'm not a part of these hated political parties. I'm not a party hack. I'm not a creature of the parties. At a time when parties are hated with ample justification, he could say, no, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I may be running on the Republican ticket, but still, I'm really a national unity candidate, and I don't want to get down into the dirt of these party things. Notice that Romney did not attend the Republican Southern Leadership Conference. I think he doesn't want to be seen among this gaggle of poultry that's there. Romney is the guy with the connections to Wall Street. He's an asset stripper. He's a hedge fund hyena, and he would be, in some ways, the new Bruning. So we could have von Hindenburg, Petraeus as president, and then the de facto prime minister running the government from day to day, doing the dirty details of writing the austerity decrees, Romney. And we could go on. Interestingly enough, Hans Fallada, writer, he wrote this fairly well-known book, What Now, Little Man? Was nun, kleiner Mann, which is the story of the lower middle class, the petty bourgeois in a world economic crisis, the continuous insecurity, the grave disappointments that come with all this. He has a book called Peasants, Bureaucrats, and Bombs, and he's writing about the Landvolk. The Landvolk are a movement in various rural parts of Germany. It's like a farmers' rebellion, who, some fringes of this and various others, engage in setting off some bombs in various parts of northern Germany. And Fallada had worked as a court reporter in one of these trials, so he writes a book about it, Peasants, Bureaucrats, Government Bureaucrats, and Bombs. And it's a tax rebellion. And you look and you say, well, isn't this a kind of extremist militia that then crosses over into the realm of these setting off these charges in various places? And you say, isn't there an eerie, uncanny sense that history repeats itself because people don't know what has come before, and so forth. So here's what you see in Weimar, and this it has to do with this discussion about civility and partisanship. I've tried to stress partisanship And the violent political debate is not just a state of mind. It is a material, economic fact. It means that we've reached the point where even if you're in the ruling elite, your faction is not guaranteed survival. If you were part of the Bear Stearns faction of Wall Street, you got axed. Your stocks went down to $1 or $2. If you were part of the Lehman Brothers faction of Wall Street, even worse, you got slammed. You lost big time. If you're part of the J.P. Morgan Chase or the Morgan Stanley or the Goldman Sachs part of Wall Street, you did a whole lot better, and you continue to do a whole lot better. And that's the basis of it, the triage in the ruling elite, the lifeboat ethics in the ruling elite, where they have to get together and say, who's going to be thrown overboard? We can't all survive. We've got to throw some people overboard. Or the troika, right? You're going across the Russian landscape. The wolves are chasing you, and they're gaining, and you got to throw somebody off the sled to prevent the wolves from getting you, and they're going to stop then and tear this other person to pieces. That's the mood in the ruling class, and that's why they're so acrimonious, because they know that not all interests can survive, right? If you're representing low-wage Southern employers in sweatshops, then if the Wall Street characters come on the scene, it's you or them, and you know that the Wall Street guys are going to get the inside track. So therefore, a tremendous prevalence. So you get locked into this constant cycle, a deadlock. As the depression gets worse, the resentments get more, polarization increases, the system jams up, gridlock emerges. The answer is a recovery program. Find a recovery program at the top of my website, tarpley.net, and we will see you next week.